Hi, I'm Chuck Wolf, and this is the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And today I have a guest, Susan Stellman, who is the Director of Education for a global organization, 6 Seconds. It's one of the largest organizations in the world that promotes emotional intelligence worldwide. And we're going to be talking today about, the big picture for today's conversation is we're going to talk about 6 Seconds, which now has a relationship with Yale University's Center for Emotional Intelligence, with Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation, and also with Facebook. I've had Mark Brackett, who's the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence, on before, talking about his work with Facebook. I've also had him talking a bit about the Emotion Revolution. 6 Seconds is now a partner to that organization, so I'd like to introduce you to Susan, who you can see on the screen as well. Susan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization, and then a little bit about the big picture that's going on with you as a partner to Yale University, Facebook, and Lady Gaga's organization?
Sure. Thank you so much, Chuck, for having me on the show. So I am the Director of Education. I work globally. I work mostly online, but also face-to-face with educators, consultants, teachers, parents, people around the world who are interested in promoting emotional intelligence, which often, as you know, we call social emotional learning in schools, and promoting, cultivating, encouraging, and teaching that around the world, both to students, but also very much to the adults in the schools. So this is my main role at 6 Seconds. In my past, I've been a school counselor. I was actually a school counselor in Connecticut for 20 years and a licensed professional counselor. But what I do now is really spreading that ripple of emotional intelligence around the world. And it's very encouraging to see the explosion over the last 5, 10, 20 years of this movement of social emotional learning, and now to see it in place in this great new initiative sponsored by Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Facebook, and with 6 Seconds as a partner. So I can tell you a little bit more about that. I do want to say about 6 Seconds that we are a nonprofit. We're the largest emotional intelligence nonprofit organization in the world, and we have network leaders in about 50 different cities around the world that are volunteer positions, people stepping up to really embrace our mission, which is to have 1 billion people practicing emotional intelligence by 2039, when our wonderful dear founder, Dr. Annabelle Jensen, will be 100 years old.
Well, I know you've done a lot of exciting things. I know I've worked closely at different points with Josh Friedman, the president of your organization. And Josh has an amazing amount of energy and a real gift for this field. And he has made a huge contribution, as have you, in the area of education. Now, I'd like to explore a little bit about what Yale's doing with Lady Gaga, this whole idea of the emotion revolution, your view of that, and a bit about the connection to Facebook, and then how 6 Seconds is now partnering with those other organizations. Tell us a little bit about that. That'd be great.
Yeah. So the emotion revolution part of this project really began with Yale and the Born This Way Foundation, which is Lady Gaga's organization. And she's an amazing person, by the way. I had a chance to meet her a little bit in Connecticut at Yale. She's so honest and so out there with her feelings and telling her own story. It was really beautiful. And so Yale and the Born This Way Foundation really recognize the need for teenagers to be able to be more empowered at school, to express their feelings, to be recognized as something more than just a, say, troubled teen. And so they really started a large survey of tens of thousands of students, asking them how did they feel in school. And the results, perhaps not surprising to anyone, were tired, bored, stressed. So how did they want to feel? They wanted to feel different. They wanted to feel happy. They wanted to feel excited and energized. So they came together with Facebook to create this platform, brought lots of educators. We at 6 Seconds were part of this group of educators and brought lots of teens together, sometimes at Yale and sometimes at Facebook headquarters. And we worked on what do what are the emotions that kids would like to feel? Inspired, contented, balanced, empowered, happy, optimistic, resilient. So we created, with teens leading this effort, some wonderful activities, some short 10-minute activities, some hour-long activities that teachers can do with students. This is really geared, Chuck, to high school students at this point, and what they can do with students to really bring emotion back into the classroom. And this is so appropriate for your emotion show, to really recognize that emotions are the key to learning. And unless students' emotions are brought out, validated, supported, appreciated, they're going to be shut off in those emotions that they described, the bored, the stress, the tense, disengaged. So that was the impetus on and Facebook has been a tremendous catalyst for this project. And of course, now we have a very beautiful website that Facebook and Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence have put together. And I will give you actually the link for that. It's very simple to remember. It's Inspired, which is the name of this project, inspired.facebook.com. And we have some beautiful lessons on there, as I said, for teachers to do with their students, short lessons, longer lessons, and also projects that students can do with their teachers collaboratively over time to really spread this in their own communities, in their own work, maybe some service projects. And there's a nice award. I think there's a $10,000 reward that Facebook is giving to some schools that win this project idea. So that's the Facebook side and the Inspire Yale side of this coin.
Let me say a couple of things, Susan. First, thank you for that overall description. I thought it was a very nice summary. I also appreciate you including the idea of what teenage students are feeling and what they'd like to feel, because that's exactly the format for the show, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. Mm-hmm. I'd like to add a personal note to this, that I do know Lady Gaga's story a bit, mm-hmm. and I also know Mark Brackett's story, who was the director for the Center for Emotional Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And both of them are incredibly successful people. More people will, of course, know Lady Gaga, but as being part of this field in emotional intelligence, I've seen Mark really grow in that field and really become one of the best presenters and making one of the best contributions of anyone, because not only is the Yale Center providing really excellent tools to support children in schools at all grade levels, including high school, mm-hmm. but Mark took some of the work of his uncle, who was a gifted yes. teacher, and he found ways to relate actual curriculum that exists in the classroom today by taking something out of literature, like the story about Julius Caesar making a determination in front of the Senate and saying, this is the way it's going to be. And then asking children who are learning about that to reflect on their own experiences with very powerful leaders, where they've been told what's going to happen, and they had to react to that. And how did that make them feel? Or have they ever been in the Caesar role? And it's just, it makes it come alive. It's really kind of exciting. But I do want to make the point that both Mark and Lady Gaga had some real challenges themselves, mm-hmm. and they've become incredibly accomplished. And now they're working very hard to take their own success stories and make much more, or many more people also successful, who, if you're a teenager and you're listening to the show, you have to know that anything is possible, and that if you believe in yourself and you can learn and grow. And then some of the tools that 6 Seconds has provided, I think, are wonderful ways to help children and adults to grow. I know we're talking about education today, but I know 6 Seconds works a lot with adults as well.
We do.
If you could say a little bit, Susan, about the page, and I want to just make sure people get this. It's Inspired, INSPIRED,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yes, .facebook.com.
So that's pretty easy to find, inspired.facebook.com.
Right.
So we're going to show this on this on the video we're doing right now, because this is both a radio show and going to be available on YouTube as well. So go ahead, and if you don't mind, you want to take us through that? As
sure.
You tell us a little bit about your role as educators and on the web anyway, but also how it's tied to Facebook.
I'm going to show you as soon as I can share my screen with you. I'm going to show you the Inspire Ed side. So let me know whether you can see it says About, and there's a nice picture of a lot of people on the screen. Can you see that?
I can, yes.
Okay. Well, this is a good place to start if people are looking at the inspire.facebook.com side. And this is really a great picture. I thought people might enjoy seeing this. Way over on the left side of the screen in the black t-shirt is Mark Brackett.
Might have passed himself off as a teenager, it looks like.
That's right. Well, we all are. And sort of in the middle of the screen in a collared shirt with a white stripe on it is Josh Friedman, who is, as you mentioned, our CEO at 6 Seconds. And I'm down there in the first row, really trying to be a little small along with the other kids on there with a red necklace on. So this really, this gives you a little bit of a sense, kind of the passion and enthusiasm and the vision of Facebook and the Yale Center to go along with this. And I'm just going to scroll down so that people can see that on their I'm saying on their side because I'm soon going to show you the 6 second side of this, but on their side there are some wonderful feelings that they want to encourage, as we said, the opposite or the in contrast to the feelings that kids told us they feel now. So inspired, empowered, passionate, purposeful, safe, comfortable, happy, excited. So those are some of the feelings. You can see the rest of those down there. So, and then just to give you a little bit of a sense of learning activities, I'm going to click on the part that says learning activities, and then you can choose one of those lessons, one of those feeling areas. So let's just say, for an example, we choose inspired and empowered. And we will come to an overview of that idea, why that's important for students to feel empowered in the classroom, feel capable, feel that they are motivated by a sense of optimism and they have a persistence to their work. We all know this is important for kids. And then there are 10-minute activities. One of them that I really like that I was looking at earlier is something called Daily Affirmation for Empowerment. And you know that when we all athletes know this, we teach this to kids, when we have a self-affirmation that makes us believe that something is possible, it's much more likely to happen, and it gives us hope and it gives us that sense of optimism. So there's a real quick 10-minute activity here that teachers can do by asking students to think of a self-affirmation and what does it sound like, what does it feel like. A simple one could be, I am in control of my actions and emotions. Though I cannot control what happens to me, I can control how I react. So those kinds of things are very useful, and that can easily be brought into the beginning of really any class, Chuck, in a high school classroom, really reminding kids where they are and how they have a power of choice once they're aware of their emotions and what the outcome can be, because the next activity I won't show you, but another 10-minute activity is envisioning walking across that graduation stage. And as we all know, in the field of education, college and career readiness is such an important step. And we know that students who are able to recognize their emotions, make intentional choices, and envision that outcome, that noble goal, being able to graduate and go on to make a difference in the world, that's really important.
So let me frame that a bit, Susan, in terms of people that are regular listeners that know the emotion roadmap. So if you're finding yourself with, you either are a teenager or you have teenagers at home, and your son or daughter, or you are that person, and you're wondering about how to change the feelings you're having because you don't feel empowered, you don't feel in control, and you often don't feel like you're in charge of how you even react.
Right.
But the idea of having a compelling vision, which is this idea of seeing yourself walk across the platform with a graduate degree on your way to wherever the future holds on the next step of your journey, that's exciting and purposeful because you've thought about it and you're going where you wanted to go because you've made that decision. That sometimes you have to have a clear first step to make a change happen. And one of the ways we talk about changing your feelings is to be clear about what do you need to do to make that feeling happen, to replace the current feeling that isn't so helpful. And in this particular case, you're saying by starting with a self-affirmation. And a self-affirmation is simply a statement you say to yourself, which you repeat it and you keep repeating it, and you want to repeat it so that at some point you begin to really believe it. And as you say these things, you begin to act on them. If you say I'm in control in the way that you react to an event, in the past, you just might have been insulted, disappointed, feeling rejected, disillusioned, disrespected, all those negatives. Instead, maybe turning those situations around and saying, something happened that in the past I reacted poorly to, but I'm feeling stronger today. I can react better today. I have other choices today because I've made this plan for myself and I'm acting on it daily. Does that sound right to you?
That's exactly right. And what that reminds me of is some questions that I've been encouraging people to use on our school climate survey that we promote at 6 Seconds. 2 questions came from a Gallup poll, and one of those questions that really promotes students' engagement is, do you have someone at school who you always feel is there for you that you can talk to? So someone, a student, as you were saying, who might not be able to do that on their own, being able to have a teacher, a coach, a counselor, someone at their school who is able to give them that kind of support for that self-affirmation, that's really important. And the second question that the Gallup poll identified as most important for student engagement is there someone at school that makes you feel excited about your future? So that's another way that self-affirmation comes in. If you have a teacher who can help you to envision that walk across the stage at graduation, that's really important. Who can help you think of what you would like to do with your life to really make a difference to others. So I think those are great.
Talk a little bit, Susan, about how people who are educators can use these activities. In other words, I want to make the case, people might be wondering, is this a sales pitch to buy products from 6 Seconds? And a lot of this is free, right?
Everything we've talked about is free so far, yes. We do have a school climate survey that's a part of our consultation, but the most important part of the 6 Seconds world is our nonprofit network, and the work that we are doing around the world to support education through our website, EQ.org. That's our community website. We don't sell anything on that website, and that kind of leads us to the other half of this initiative sponsored by Facebook and with Yale and Born This Way Foundation, which is, and I guess this is really the important point to make now, that we can be supportive and encouraging of students' emotions. We can welcome them, we can appreciate them, we can help them to identify them and change them and transform them. But what's missing in that discussion is, what about us as the adults? What about us as the teachers, as the counselors, as the parents, as the administrators, as the coaches? And we know from so much research in the field that teachers who acknowledge and develop and strengthen their own social emotional learning competencies prevent burnout in themselves. I mean, that is just without a doubt one of the most important lessons, is that we need to start with ourselves for a couple of reasons. One, we need to be able to teach some of these skills to students. And what are those skills? They're skills of self-awareness, self-management, self-regulation. They're skills of optimism. They're skills of applying consequential thinking, skills of intrinsic motivation and empathy, very important. A lot of people are talking about empathy now, but if we don't practice those for ourselves, then we really can't, one, teach them. It's just sort of like if we never learn math in school, we can't be a math teacher. And most teachers, through no fault of their own, or educators, really have not had an education in social emotional learning for themselves as part of their own college or graduate training. And that's wonderful. Across the world, I know that's changing now. And so many colleges and universities are beginning to include social emotional learning for the students themselves. And then that ripples out. As we have teachers, we have clinicians, we have lawyers, we have doctors who are really starting to learn this for themselves first and then ripple out. So what happened, Chuck, is that as Facebook and 6 Seconds and Yale were developing these activities that we've been talking about, we realized that we needed a really separate part of this project for teachers and educators themselves to be able to practice these activities, not only for students, but really for ourselves. And so this is where the partnership came in, where 6 Seconds now has a lovely partnership to promote on our own website, and this is again completely free, on EQ.org, the same lesson, the same feelings that I just shared with you, but for teachers and educators ourselves, for all of us, for you and me, for all of us as we develop these competencies together. So I thought maybe we'd go over there and take a look at that. So if you go to the partnership page on the Facebook, inspired.facebook.com, 6 Seconds is listed right as first partner. And if we click on the link to educator professional development, we end up on the EQ.org, that 6 Seconds community practice page, entirely free for any of your listeners, anyone around the world, to go through these activities. And I thought I'd show you some of these and how these really help us to practice for ourselves.
I want to stop you, Susan, for a minute, just to remind people. So some people are viewing this on their screen. Actually, some people might be I also have my radio show videotaped for Simsbury Community Television. And I'm actually hoping the Simsbury school system at some point will work with Yale University for what they're doing in schools. But I want to just point out, for those people that are listening to this, that if you go to, and I'll say it slowly for you so people can write it down, because not everybody.
Yes, thank you.
So it's EQ, Emotion Quotient, or EQ.org/learn/courses/inspired /. So I'll say it one more time so that people can do this on their own at home when you have time, but it's EQ.org/learn/courses/inspired /. And then what you see here is a whole bunch of information that you can then click on, and we're going to take a look at one of these modules, and we'll walk through this together and we'll talk about it. But if you actually go to the page, you can do this on your own. And again, the things we're talking about through the generosity of the hardworking people at 6 Seconds, all this is free.
Absolutely.
Well, it's true for educators. I think some of these examples could be really, and if we're talking about managing emotions, it could be for any adult. It doesn't have to be just educators. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. This works for anyone. And I encourage people to look at this both for themselves as an educator, but as a parent, as a coach, as a professional. You can go through these activities. They're really for all of us as adults to deepen, the wisdom lies within. And our EQ practice, what we want to promote to our students, to our children, to our friends, to our family, it starts from what we do within and how we practice these and get better at these. Because one of the nice things, as you know, Chuck, about emotional intelligence is you can get better at it. I remember when I was a school counselor in Connecticut, and I would tell that to my kids, and some of the kids, their IQ might not have been, 150, and they were so thrilled that they could get better and they could get stronger at managing their emotions, at having empathy for others, at getting along with others, solving problems, reducing conflict, dealing with bullying, which, by the way, of course, is one of the most important areas that Facebook has been working on with Yale as some ways to report bullying if someone sees that on Facebook. So these are the categories that we have identified. Promoting emotional intelligence for yourself as an educator or as a person. Then taking those EQ competencies or skills to strengthen classroom relationships. And we know, of course, from social neuroscience now that relationships are the key to learning. And emotions, the emotions that we promote in the classroom are the key to learning. So we need to be able to, Dr. Annabelle Jensen says, emotions are the most contagious of all the factors in the classroom. So can we use our EQ to strengthen our classroom relationships with those students, with our fellow teachers? Finally, the third category is supercharging our classroom, using EQ for some of the best practices of making classrooms exciting, challenging, inspiring, inclusive, fun for students so that they really feel like being there. And that's how the three modules in this professional development side, if you will, of the toolbox are organized. EQ for you, EQ relationships, and EQ classroom.
Thank you, Susan. And we're going to look at managing emotions because, again, my show is all about, it's called Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And managing your emotions is a big part of taking the wheel and controlling how you feel. So I had asked Susan if we could walk through how that particular module works.
So I've just opened up Managing Emotions, which is something anyone can do. There's no order to these lessons on the 6 Seconds EQ.org side, so someone could just start, Chuck, with Managing Emotions and kind of go on from there. And so when we talk about managing emotions, we really are talking about the first step in this process of knowing ourselves, allowing ourselves to recognize patterns that happen. You know, we all have patterns with our kids, with our colleagues, with our family members, and then recognizing a big gap between that self-awareness and the fact that we then have choices about how we want to proceed. So the first step is really to think about the emotions that come up in our classroom and think about whether we welcome them, do we believe that emotions have to be left outside the classroom door, or can we bring them into the classroom for ourselves as a teacher, not just for our students, but for ourselves as a teacher. And even if the emotions are what we might call negative, although at 6 Seconds we really prefer not to see any emotions as negative. We believe, as I'm sure you understand also, Chuck, that emotions can be great sources of data. And there's real wisdom in emotions. And, anger tells us that there's something really blocking our way. There's something wrong. Sadness tells us that we've lost something, that we need to acknowledge the importance of that loss before we can move on. Anticipation is something important is coming up. That's a great emotion to have. Surprise is something unexpected is happening. So if we can really think of emotions in that way, we welcome them before we just kind of shut them away. And I'd like to share a brief, I think it's a 30-second video where Josh Friedman, our CEO, talks about his view of treating emotions as data. So I'm going to play that right now.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of times when people are dealing with emotions, especially uncomfortable, challenging emotions, they start judging certain emotions as good or bad. What's really powerful is just to consider emotions are data. Something's happening. I have big feelings, something big is happening. And if we can reframe emotion as just a signal, as information, it allows us to handle it much more easily. We step back from the experience and we just say, oh, okay, it's information. Let me pay attention to it. And that's really the essence of emotional intelligence.
Great. So I think that's something. Can you hear me okay, Chuck?
Yes, I can. It's fine.
So following up on Josh's statement, I'd like to give your listeners a tool that we love. It's called VET, V-E-T, Validate, Explore, Transform. I just think it's a great, great tool for using just all during the day when we're having some emotions that we think may be challenging or difficult. And it's easily something that people can do also with their students, with their family members, with their clients, in any situation. And so the first step, as Josh was talking about, is to acknowledge and validate those feelings, accepting the feelings, saying, it's okay. I'm not going to sweep this emotion under the rug. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to say, okay, I recognize I have it. Now what happens next? So the next step is to explore that feeling and say, what's this feeling telling me? What's the message? How can this feeling be helpful to me? So one thing that we find very useful, again, is to say there are a lot of different emotions that might be happening. So one part of exploring might be to say, well, I'm angry, but I'm also sad. I'm also anxious. And we can have more than one emotion at the same time. We can also explore the range of emotions and say, well, wait a minute, I'm furious. Well, maybe I'm not really furious. Maybe I'm just annoyed. If I bring it down a notch, maybe that's a way that I can handle a situation better if I'm not completely hijacked by my emotions. And finally, the third step is to transform that emotion and to really look at it and say, what do I want to do with that emotion? Is there something I can do that will not only make me feel better, maybe make the other person feel better, maybe will add peace to the situation? One example that I often give about this is, some of the great sadness that we've all experienced, and particularly in Connecticut over some of the tragic shootings that have happened in the last couple of years. And I was in Tucson when Gabby Giffords was shot in a shopping center near where I live. And I went to some of the gatherings where students, children, all over the town came and left little reminders and in honor of the people who were shot. There was a little girl shot. And the one that's really stuck in my mind was a little boy. He was 9 years old who said, I am sad in honor of Christina, who was the young girl who died. In honor of Christina, I will do better in math. And I thought that was just so sweet, because here's a child who clearly worked with his parents or maybe his teachers to really understand what the sadness was. And even for a little kid, that was possible to do. What the sadness was, the message was, I will do better in the world in order to honor this beautiful child who was also shot. So I really like that example of being able to use that both with ourselves and with our children. So validate, explore, transform. When I do that with kids in school, I usually have a little symbol of a vet, because kids like vets, doctors who are veterinarians. So I bring that in and show kids validate, explore, transform. So that's really something that we can do several times a day. We as adults, we can keep a journal. We can stop ourselves when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling upset or sad or tired or bored, and really just take some time to do that. Validate, explore, transform.
Let me ask you a question about this, or also make a comment. For a lot of years, I had the opportunity to work with Peter Salovey, and Peter, of course, as you know, is president of Yale and one of the founders of the Mayer Salovey ability-based model of emotional intelligence. And Peter described emotions as an evolutionary system that informs us. He also, as Josh did, talks about emotions as data in a similar way. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that struck me was, as I listened to you talk about this, was in the work that I did with Peter and his colleagues, I began to see that sometimes there are emotions that as you think about them and you explore them, you realize, I'm feeling joy. I just finished vacation. I know I've got a lot of things in front of me. I'm starting to feel like a bit anxious about all that's in front of me, but I want to hold on to the joy for a while longer. And so sometimes you want to think about how to maintain a certain feeling.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Other times you find that the feelings that you're having, like anger, at some point are useful in describing, an obstacle in your way to keep from getting something done, or an injustice that's happening that's upsetting to you and making you angry. And at some point that's very valid, but over time, perhaps the anger lingers and it becomes problematic, or grief, which is the loss of a,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes the loss seems to linger. And at some point you want to move past the grieving period. So that's when I think this whole concept of validate, what are you feeling? You know, it was useful to me, or is useful to me, or isn't useful to me. And then you decide how you transform it. That's consistent with the work that I do when I'm helping people. It's to think about what you are feeling, and then to move from that to either maintaining that, or most often when someone's calling me on my show, it's the, how do I change what I'm feeling, because it's really not helpful.
So, you know, we have 3 big categories in our 6 seconds model of emotional intelligence. And the first one is know yourself. And I think we'll stay right there. But the know yourself is not only knowing your feelings, but as you just described so beautifully, recognizing your patterns. And so I would like to share with your audience that the first actual unit in this EQ.org module here on our own emotions is noticing our patterns. And this is really an important one because, as you say, if we come into, let's say we're educators and we come into school every single day dragging our feet and we can't wait for vacation to start and we're tired and we're annoyed at all the requests that our students are making, we want to validate that. At the same time, we want to say, okay, when I am stressed, you know, and we have a nice little formula, you know, it's a consequences. When something happens, what's the consequence? So what's the stimulus? When I am stressed, when I have too much to do, and this is true for me, when I'm stressed, when I have too much to do, too many expectations, what happens? I get annoyed at more requests. I get impatient because I think people should be able to handle things by themselves. I lose my empathy for what people are really asking. So that's a pattern that clearly I've noticed. So at that point, we have a great choice, right? To say, okay, I accept that feeling, but I wonder if I could redo it, if I had a way to do it over again, could I change that pattern? And I have really discovered, since I've been working on empathy quite a bit for myself, I've discovered that if I really say, you know, I will take just enough time to really recognize what's the story behind this person who's asking me things. Take the high road, as Josh often says, really appreciate what really is great about this person in spite of the things that might be annoying me, how their brain style might be different, how their talents and their drive and their decision making just really might be different than mine, and to really take their perspective really allows me personally to have more empathy and then to really get things done. Really taking that extra few minutes to really appreciate the other person and what they're asking for. And I'm just looking, one of our modules in the second half of the second part of our 3 modules is increasing empathy to reduce burnout. Because we have some really nice research that's been done in the field that says that as we increase our empathy, it actually helps us to feel less stressed and less burned out.
Well, you make an interesting case, and I think there's, I don't know if you know Helen Reese's work at Harvard. She's doing some wonderful work around empathy, and she's showing that in healthcare with doctors and nurses, that if she's able to teach other physicians to be more empathic, that they actually have better patient outcomes, which to doctors who are typically very logical, very analytic in the way they look at things, and they need to be for obvious reasons, I guess. But, you know, being empathic has always been something that is kind of like, if you happen to be gifted with it, great. But if you don't have it, it's not such a big deal. And yet it's turning out that being empathic with others not only helps the others, but it actually helps you, is what you're saying, and makes you more resilient. And I think that there is, I think I shared with you, I know I did the other day, that Harvard Business Review, the most recent edition, has, well, what about having too much empathy? When is empathy a problem? So I know that there's different views on empathy, but I think for the most part, most people are not too empathic or empathetic. And I think that more is better for most. And if you find yourself identifying with someone else. One, in your case, I think you're saying the pattern of finding someone annoying when you stop and think, who are they? What do they care about? What are their values? How are they different than me?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you start to identify with them. You don't feel the same way anymore. And now you have more resilience and energy yourself to deal with that. But this is all very nice. I'd like to make sure we have time, though. I'd like to move to the parent site. We have a chance to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
While we're talking about educators, and again, everybody could do this. I did want to, again, 6 Seconds has a great reputation in helping parents, not just educators. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the site that works with parents.
So while, just as you said, Chuck, many of these same activities that we have here for educators work for all of us as adults and as parents. But we also have, very specifically in the same part of our website, which is our free courses, we have a course called EQ 101 for Parents. And I will give people very slowly that same link that you just gave them. It's eq.org/learn/courses/parents/. And again, we have 6 different modules. People can look around and really think about what they're interested in: increasing awareness, navigating the chaos and complexity that's part of the lives of children and parents and families. A really interesting module on what do we stand for. I love the fact that some people are able to have a family motto or a family way of saying, we include others in this family. We do good for others as part of this family. We solve problems together peacefully as part of this family. So that kind of what do we stand for is a really beautiful thing. And of course, these can be done in a classroom too. And thinking about power and how to develop relationships. So yes, all the same activities of addressing difficult situations in families. Again, we can use that validate, explore, transform. I love, and I did as a, when I'm still a parent, my kids are 31 and 34 years old now. I'm sorry, that's not right. 33 and 36. Time flies, doesn't it? And we had family meetings all the way through their, childhood years, their elementary and even into high school years. And I think that's a wonderful tool and technique, very akin to suggesting to teachers that they take some time to do circle time or morning meetings with kids in school, where empathy can be developed by sharing feelings, just even brief check-ins, where solving problems within the family can be talked about from sort of a positive rather than, problem-based, more of a solution-based focus. So I think this is a wonderful website that people should take their time to explore, to really learn about how EQ can be so useful. It's crucial in our parenting. And of course, as we parent, then we hopefully will raise our children to be emotionally intelligent and bring the cycle around even further.
Let me echo something you said in the sense that my wife and I raised 3 daughters, and my wife Barbara was pretty insistent on having family meals together. Uh-huh. And well, some people, over the years may have complained a bit about it. Mostly they didn't. Mostly they really enjoyed it. Not only did they enjoy it, but they found when they went off to college and they began to meet a number of people, outside of the circle of the area where we grew up, that many people did not have family dinners together and didn't have a closeness with the family as a result of it. So I think that while this looks a little bit formal about how you might structure, a family dinner or family time together, I think the idea of just being together.
Just talking, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to give you one quick example from my own life, and I talk about this so often that my son says he should get royalties for my talking about him. But children are different, right? And so one child is always often easy. The other child is often more challenging. And I had one of each. And really, I used that recently. I used that thought about recognizing patterns. When my son was challenging, really intellectually challenging, I don't mean in any physical way, but when he would contradict or question authority or whatever he was doing, I would be defensive, and then I would clamp down even harder and I would argue even harder. I'm sure that's pretty typical for many of our listeners. And I realized that I really could have transformed. I could have recognized that feeling. I could have said, I need a timeout, not my son needs a timeout, but I need a timeout, and taking some time to really go through that, validate, explore, transform. And if I had to do it over again, I would have taken that time to use that empathy that we were just talking about to say, what's really going on with him? What is he really saying underneath that anger, underneath that questioning authority? And really, he had some fabulous ideas. And really now, many years later, I recognize that some of the things he was saying are things that we now recognize in education, the need to really get kids out in the community and apprenticing and working with others and, not sitting in stultifying classrooms where there's no excitement and motivation and emotion and challenge. So it's really, would like to say that we have our Know Yourself section of our model and our Making Good Choices that we've been talking about. And we also have, finally, to complete our circle, our Give Yourself. And the Give Yourself is empathy and pursuing a noble goal. And of course, parenting is one of the most important noble goals of all. So really thinking about, what do we want with our children in the long run? Do we want to win a battle today over homework or over dress or over cleaning a room? Or do we want to develop a larger future-oriented relationship that will last us for the rest of our lives, and help our children and support them as they grow? And I'm really happy to say that big picture has really worked out for us, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have a very close relationship with both of my sons at this point. But I think it's really important to think about that ahead of time, and what really are we hoping to gain, not just clamping down and winning a particular fight with our kids.
Well, the concepts that you're sharing are really quite lovely, I think, in many ways. Certainly, raising 3 children, you want to do it as well as anyone possibly can. You want to be the best parent you can be. And yet you face days where it does seem like cleaning the room is the most important thing.
Right.
I think your point is that, at least the way I think about this is, again, some of these things that I've learned over the years is that, hey, in terms of managing my own emotions, I'm very skilled at doing that with clients, I found, but sometimes I've struggled with my children. And I think a good example of that is if I'm coaching someone in an executive world and I provide some thoughts about the way I would approach a certain situation, and they say, well, I appreciate your thoughts, Chuck, but I'm going to do it the way I talked about initially. I said, fine, we'll talk about how that works out for you afterwards.
Right.
And that's okay for me if they're choosing to do it differently. If it's my daughter or one of my 3 daughters and they're about to do something I think is really a problem, and they say something similar to what an executive might have said to me, that's not acceptable. Because I don't want them to have to go through the experience of learning by touching the stove.
That's right.
So I found that in managing emotions, I think part of as I was listening to you and thinking about in raising children, one of the thoughts is when somebody does something, first of all, this is a really important point, and if we're talking about kids, I'd like to raise it, is that sometimes negative attention is almost always better than no attention. So if you see a son or a daughter doing something that is about to start into an area where you and that child are going to be in conflict, if you can stop whatever you're doing and find some way to do something positive with that child, you're going to head that off. So I just think in terms of managing emotions with your children, that when we feel too busy and we're so caught up in stuff that we know we got to do, but our child is about to do something that, when something is wrong and they're doing something that they're acting out, you're not going to be doing the other stuff anyway. You're going to be dealing with their negative stuff. So if you catch it soon enough, in terms of taking the wheel and controlling how you and they feel, you can do something to offset it in the very.
And recognizing that even if the behavior is not something that we encourage or support or even allow, certainly the feelings have to be validated. And that's kind of old news, but it's worth bringing up again, that validating those feelings and sort of being, the guide on the side with that child, of really helping that child to think through the situation, rewind that videotape, recognize their patterns, and say, well, is there something you could have done a little bit differently that, again, would have created maybe a more peaceful resolution to the situation? And I think that's really very important if we teach our kids about looking for peace, looking for a more tolerant, collaborative solution to a problem. I think we're really doing a great service to our kids to do that.
Well, and I think just to build a little bit more on that, for me, sometimes when someone's done something that I consider inappropriate, and this isn't just with children, by the way. I think I shared this as well when we talked previously. One of the people that are one of the great leaders I've ever worked with, had the privilege of working with, he had said that, when someone does something that he sees that's a problem, he will go up to them and not be angry and yell. He'll just say, gee, I just saw something that I don't really understand. What were you thinking? And what were you feeling when you did that?
Yeah.
And how did you think that the other person felt after you did that? Is that what you wanted to do, or is that what you wanted to feel? And just asking people to explore their own feelings about what they've just done. And I've had a principal I've worked with and coached who did the same thing on disciplinary situations at school. So I think the more that we can get into understanding that feelings drive a lot of behaviors that cause conflict, but rather than just addressing the conflict and hitting it head on and hard, that maybe at times at least it's worth exploring this idea of why is somebody doing that in terms of how they're feeling. And if they feel a certain way, is there another way for them to meet and get those feelings met without doing something that's so negative?
That's a really great point, and I'd like to say that's a great goal for us, to remove judgment and go from judgment to curiosity, judgment about our own emotions and about others' emotions. And finally, I don't want to end the parenting on necessarily a problem note, but also to say that how wonderful to be able to teach our kids about empathy, which again is one of the most powerful emotions and actions that we can take. And I, remember in family meetings, and again, we can do this in school and class meetings, just a simple check-in, just a simple, how is everyone feeling, either by number or by word or by animal or whatever, and really having everyone else in the room reflect back an empathic response. Well, I'm feeling, stressed today. I hear that you're feeling stressed and anxious today. If there's something I can do, let me know. I mean, that's a wonderful, wonderful lesson for kids, to teach kids an empathic response to someone else's expression of their feelings, as well as joy in someone else's feelings. Like, I just did really well on a test today and I'm proud of it. And to be able to have others in the family be able to say, that's great, I feel good for you. I'm really glad that that happened. You must be really proud of yourself. So really, to be able to teach kids to express empathy, genuinely, of course, in both challenging and also wonderful situations, I think is a great and wonderful lesson that people can learn from this EQ development for themselves.
One other thing I guess I'd share is I kind of thought about this as you were talking, Susan. Many years ago, I worked in Exxon, and one of the things that Exxon did that they were brilliant at was they had management development programs where they were week-long for people that were moving into the management or the secondary level of management roles, and they would bring in high-potential, very successful senior managers to co-facilitate the course with people that were doing training and development. And I was doing the training and development part, and I was partnered with a fellow who came in who was brilliant and fun and engaging, high-spirited, high energy, But he said that one of the things that he learned over his life was he kind of captured the idea of affirmations, which you talked about in the beginning of the show. And he said that he was coming home at the end of every day thinking about all the mistakes he made, although he made very few. But he was a perfectionist, he said, and he would take home anything that was a problem, and he would be angry with himself, and he would bring that anger into the household. And it almost cost him his marriage and his family. And he was smart enough to realize that he was in trouble, and that pattern that he is living every day was a problem. And he began to think, what could he do different? And this is the whole concept of emotion roadmap, right? How could he feel differently? And he said, before he left, at the end of every day now, what he would do is he would take and think about any of the mistakes, because he couldn't let go of that. But he would think about what he would do different to avoid making that mistake in the future. And then before he walked out the door, he would think about the thing that made him feel the best about the day. And that's what he focused on his drive home, back home. And it changed everything for his life. And I'm thinking as I'm listening to you that I guess you could do that at the end of the day with your family at dinner as well. Tell me about your day, the good, the bad, the ugly.
The ugly, right.
At the end, what's the best thing that happened at the end of the day? And we all affirm ourselves in each other.
We haven't used the word optimism yet in our discussion today, but that really is one of my favorite, and it's certainly Dr. Annabelle Jensen's favorite competency in the 6 seconds model, is that sense that our challenges, if we allow them to be, can be temporary and isolated, and effort is possible to change them. So I think that's really important, because there's no family that will not have challenges, that will not have tremendous obstacles in their path. My own son that I was describing before developed type 1 diabetes when he was 12, went down and had some wonderful treatment at the Yale clinic. And optimism is really an important skill, I should say, for all of us to develop. So when our families are having health challenges, financial, just interpersonal, moving transitions, the kinds of things that we all face, economic challenges, that we really can use that, develop that skill of seeing how powerful we can be if we see our challenges as somewhat temporary, somewhat isolated. It's not our whole lives. Even my son, even though he developed diabetes, he would have it for his whole life, but the intense stress of that time, was something that he could take control over, and he had power over. And, with support, we were able to really, he's doing great right now. So I think it's really important to maybe to end on a note of optimism here, that people can learn these skills, that they can be powerful, they can get support from each other, they can go to these wonderful websites like EQ.org and like the Facebook Inspired website, and really just dive in and practice some things and learn some things and reflect on how that goes.
So thank you, Susan. I want to tell everybody that's listening or watching, you've been listening to WPKN 89.5 FM, or you've been watching on Live Action TV in Simsbury, you're watching on YouTube. And I want to thank Susan for being a wonderful guest and sharing a lot of information. Again, all of the things we've talked about today are free, something that you can make available to you as an educator, as a parent, as a human being, as an adult, as a child, as a teenager. These are wonderful skills to be learning about, and so you can take the wheel and control how you feel. Thank you so much, Susan, for being our guest, and congratulations again on partnering with Yale, with Lady Gaga, and with Facebook, and congratulations on all the wonderful work 6 Seconds is doing.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be on your show. So long.
Bye-bye. Okay, cool.